This is to okay. 10 more minutes. Okay, good. 10 more minutes. Good one. Yeah. 10 more minutes. We'll let some understand. We'll let more than a little bit less. Good. 10 more minutes. Good one. Yeah. 10 more minutes. We'll let some understand. We'll let more than a little bit less. Yeah. 10 more minutes. We'll let some understand. We'll let more than a little bit less.
Test.
Yeah. We'll let some understand. We'll let more than a little bit.
Test. Yes. Yes.
Breakout room 2. Mute, please.
Yes.
Breakout room 2. Mute, please.
Yes.
Breakout room 2. Mute, please. Mute, please.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Those in, is the volume okay? Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Those in Yumiwelo Hilo Port Villa at the same time. Good morning to our friends around the region. My name is George Hoa. I'm from the Solomon Islands. I'm currently the Deputy Director General of the MSG. I will be your MC for this morning. So we will start as we already have our friends around the region and outside of the region. And so you have the agenda being circulated to all of you. And so we'll start right away with an opening prayer by Libby Malas. Thank you.
Let's bow our heads in prayer. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for the day today, Heavenly Father, as we all come here to begin this new day, Lord. We are grateful for the life that you've given us, Heavenly Father. As we're going to begin this meeting, Lord, we just ask you to be with us, Lord. Be with the presenters, and Lord, may you continue to help us and give us the wisdom, knowledge, and understanding that we need in order to carry out the day today. Heavenly Father, we glorify your name always, and we give you back all the praise, glory, and honor in Jesus' wonderful name. Amen.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Now, if we could please now have the landing of the chief guest, please. Thank you so much. Our chief guest is the acting DG of the Ministry of Tourism, Trade, Commerce here in Vanuatu. He is Mr. Jimmy Rantes. And so we are pleased to have you this morning, and for your, in the midst of your busy schedule, that you can make time to be part of this event. Now, I intend to be brief around a brief kind of welcome, as we have a long morning to deliberate on a lot of things. So let me start. Your Excellencies, here I recognize the presence of the Vanuatu High Commission to Australia, and that for New Zealand. At the same time, Ambassador Mary, she's in Geneva, joining us, and other esteemed representatives from international organizations, WTO, European Union, Vanuatu government, and the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat, representatives of the private sector, Vanuatu Chamber of Commerce, and here before us here in Port Villa and outside, entrepreneurs in various areas of business. Here in Port Villa, you will realize that we've decided to also myself inside a room, women and the crafts, women who move these different areas of work that they do, and representatives from our Blue Pacific region. Here I recognize, and we would like to greet our friends in the region, Malo Lele to our friends in the Kingdom of Tonga, Talofa Lava to our friends in Samoa, Kia Orana to our friends in Cook Islands, and Ikamawid Omo to our friends in Nauru. Here I recognize their friends in Nauru from the President's office, and to our MSG family and members in our capitals, welcome to you all. First, I would like to acknowledge the landowners of the land upon which we meet here, the chiefs of Pango. Second, on behalf of the MSG DG, Pifs SG, and our host Vanuatu government, I'd like to welcome you all, particularly our profound gratefulness to our speakers, panelists, and all participants around the region and those here with us in Port Vila. I would also like to extend the same to the European Union for funding this event. I appreciate to them. And finally, if you have any questions about the event today and tomorrow, you're always welcome to ask. Here we have the MSG ladies team, and I'd like to recognize that the team that is responsible for putting this event together, organizing everything, is actually a women's team. So I'd like to register here my profound gratitude and appreciation to Sova, Program Manager for Trade, Pastor Jill, who's the Pifs but Melanesian Trade Advisor from Kenya. And we congratulate that country for having a new president. So was Vanuatu as well. We have Neti, our IT, the IT expert at the MSG from Vanuatu, Anna from Fiji, and we have at the back there, you have Jill Sarah of Vanuatu. I say this because at the MSG, we totally depend on this women's team. If it was not for this women's team, the men would not be walking around flash no more, as those in Vanuatu would say. And so I recognize the work that these women do and continue to do and continue to offer us the support. So that I must register here, that we have a women's team that is responsible for all of this, and I am so grateful for them. Yeah? And so our agenda and program is being circulated. We have a long morning, as I already mentioned. Welcome everyone, welcome to those in the region, and thank you so much. We will now start. Now we will start with the remarks by the acting Director General for the Ministry of Tourism, Trade and Commerce here in Vanuatu. Mr. Rantes has immense experience in working on areas of trade, tourism, is a senior and still a very senior government official here in Vanuatu. And without further ado, please join me in welcoming our chief guest, Mr. Rantes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. MC and Deputy Director General for MSG. Good morning, everyone. Mr. Leonard Luma, Director General, MSG Secretariat, Mr. Henry Puna, Secretary General for the Pacific Island Forum Secretariat, Ms. Annabelle, the Deputy Director General for World Trade Organization, Ansa Ascola, Deputy Head of Mission for EU Delegation to the Pacific, Your Excellencies, Ambassadors and High Commissions of SUBREGION missions, MSG trade officials, senior trade officers from Melanesia and Micronesia, representatives of the private sector, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning and welcome to the first hybrid Melanesian Trade and Gender Symposium. This event organized by the MSG Secretariat is timely as it provides opportunity for the MSG to convene a historian on rather exciting and tropical issue of trade and gender. There is growing dialogue and discussion take place at the international level on emerging issues of trade, gender and sustainable development. While we acknowledge there has been discussions taking place at national, this initiative is timely since for the first time, it aims to bring together trade officials, practitioners, and women entrepreneurs at national level and regional level. Before I continue, please allow me to acknowledge the presence of government officials, private sector participants, and PAF countries. I would like to thank the MSG Secretariat for extending the invitation through the Pacific Island Forum Secretariat to our friends in Polynesia and Micronesia across the Blue Pacific continent. While it is a hybrid event, I'm excited that you are able to join us online. I'm confident that the knowledge and experience shared in the next 2 days would shed some light on the cross-cutting nature of trade and gender that would be of mutual benefit to MSG and friends in the Pacific. The world has changed so much arising from COVID-19 pandemic as it impacted on Vanuatu and other Pacific Island countries in the region. Despite these challenges, Vanuatu implemented economic strategies to assist the economic recovery to sustain our communities. In the communities, we noted with keen interest women's resilience and strength to continue to provide food for their families and find innovative solutions to keep the business operating. Women entrepreneurs continue to create wealth and generate income to supplement family incomes and support family welfare. Vanuatu's graduation from the least developed country has ignited us a process of critical thinking as we reflect on the lessons in the past and identify solutions and strategies in order to position the future of our economy towards sustainable development. Trade reforms are driven by international commitments, mainly in the region and international trade agreements such as MSG Trade Agreement, PICTA, PESA Plus, and the Interim Partnership Agreement. Vanuatu remains committed to honors its obligations under the MSG Trade Agreement, PICTA, and more recently, the PESA Plus Agreement. As a state party to the MSG Trade Agreement, Vanuatu recognizes the important role and contributions of women, youths, and people with disability towards strengthening economic empowerment and development of our nation. Greater economic participation by women can provide a substantial growth to Vanuatu's GDP, either of more women join the workforce as formal wage workers, or as entrepreneurs. On a global scale, greater female economic participation can add between USD 12 to 26 trillion to global GDP by 2025. The Vanuatu Trade Policy Framework 2019 to 2025 stressed the importance of women's economic empowerment that will power the growth of Vanuatu's export sector. The high-level dialogue over the next 2 days, including presentations, panel discussions, will attempt to unpack critical issues to highlight policies, regulatory, labor mobility, trade facilitation, trade agreements, and aid for trade strategies for a gender inclusion lens. The historian long business session for participants for MSME will provide an opportunity as well for women entrepreneurs to share their experiences in branding and advertising their products and services on social media. I would like to acknowledge the Pacific Island Forum and the European Union's financial assistance and technical support towards this event. I wish you all in your deliberations, and I look forward for receiving an outcome of this symposium. Back again, thank you, Thomas.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rantes. Now we will have the a remark by the Director General of the MSG, Mr. Leonard Loma, OBE. He has a pre-recorded a statement. So without further ado, We'll have that right away. Thank you.
Secretary General of the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat, Mr. Henry Puna, Deputy Director General of the World Trade Organization, Deputy EU Delegation, His Excellency Dr. Asia Ascola, Your Excellency Ambassador Mary Falemaka, distinguished delegates and officials from MSG sub-region and our friends joining us from other PACP countries, invited guests, speakers, and moderators, representatives and participants from the private sector, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning to you all. Let me, on behalf of the MSG Secretariat, offer a very warm welcome to you all to this first Melanesian Joint Symposium on Trade and Gender held in Port Vila, Vanuatu. I wish to thank you all for finding time to join us for this symposium. I am sorry that I am not able to be with you in person today, and thus this message delivered through this medium. This event is organized for the Melanesian sub-region by the MSG Secretariat with the support of the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat, European Union TechBuff program. During my tenure as head of the MSG Secretariat, I will be actively pursuing more joint undertakings of a similar nature with the PIF and the EU in our efforts to better serve our membership. In this regard, let me convey my sincere gratitude to the Secretary General, Henry Puna of Pifs, and Her Excellency, Dr. Asia Ascola of the EU, for ensuring that this important symposium on trade and gender event is possible. I am reminded that this is the first time that we are organizing a trade and gender symposium in Melanesia. I do hope that this won't be the last, but the first of many more to come. It is pleasing to note that in keeping with the true Pacific spirit of family, goodwill, and inclusiveness, invitations have been extended to our brothers and sisters in Polynesia and Micronesia and across our blue Pacific continent to join us for what is going to be a constructive dialogue, a talanoa or storian on this important topic on trade and gender. I am hopeful that the discussions in the next 2 days will bring together useful information and provide opportunity for sharing of experiences and knowledge in good practices, not only in the trade and gender space in Melanesia, but indeed the wider Pacific region. And also, it would provide an opportunity on how best to leverage the advances in the IT area to participate meaningfully in trade and commerce. The MSG and the wider Pacific region face daunting development challenges, occasioned largely by our smallness. Smallness in relation to the size of our economies and the size of our markets. Compounding this is the vast distance to markets, diseconomies of scale high trade costs, supply side capacities, as well as the other trade infrastructure impediments that constrain us from taking optimum advantage of regional and global value chains. It is critical that the MSG economies, and indeed other Pacific Island countries, take maximum advantage of major sectors and develop appropriate sectors that could spur economic activities through support for women entrepreneurship. Let me emphasize, women entrepreneurship. At the risk of digressing from the main issues of the symposium, let me just draw your attention at this juncture to this analogy. Let us think of our respective economies and countries like a bird. We all want our economies and countries to be on an upward trajectory, like a bird in full flight. But a bird cannot fly if it has only one wing or its other wing is clipped. Likewise, I put it to you, our economies and countries cannot prosper if the other half of our population, the women folk, is not there with us in the enterprise of economic growth and nation building. Trade is recognized as an important foundation and enabler for economic growth and poverty reduction. Trade and improvement in the overall welfare of our peoples. Trade agreements are useful tools, and they have been used to lower trade barriers, incentivize private sector opportunities towards enhancing international trade. For the MSG, the current MSG trade agreement governs trade in goods only. To further enhance our economic and trade cooperation amongst our members, the services sector has been included in the new Melanesian Free Trade Agreement. This affirms and manifests in a concrete way our members' commitment to and aspirations towards the MSG sub-region attempts at greater economic integration agenda. We at the MSG Secretariat recognize that women entrepreneurs tend towards economic empowerment and development. MSG Secretariat efforts in this regard are informed by the plethora of literature by authorities on this subject. They all counsel that it cannot be done effectively without the participation of our women folk. For instance, according to the ADB's 2019 report on leveraging trade for women's economic empowerment in the Pacific, around 80% of economic activities in the Pacific are categorized in the informal sector. And interestingly enough, approximately 86% of micro, small, and medium enterprises in the region are female-owned. The statistics also show that there is still a huge potential to bridge the gap between men and women in economic activities and in labor markets in Melanesia and across the Pacific. We need to challenge ourselves to further bridge this gap. The ADB's 2019 report also illustrated a significant increase in aid for trade projects that embrace gender equality and women's empowerment in the Pacific. Correspondingly, there has been a rise in development partner contributions to support in-country aid for trade projects, which has, over the years, been directed towards gender inclusiveness in trade policies. Again, we would do well in the Pacific to embrace these positive trends and challenge our countries to take advantage of the changes in the donor community behavior and approach. In the MSG sub-region, our member states are already open for business post-COVID-19. And I note the same is happening for the other countries in the Pacific region. The experiences of the COVID-19 pandemic have been debilitating in all our economies. It has caused unprecedented damage to our communities, resulting in the closure of many micro, small, and medium enterprises. It has also precipitated major disruptions to supply chains of products and services. Massive redundancy exercises were undertaken, causing unemployment to rise in the formal sectors. The livelihoods of our communities were adversely affected in many, many ways, and our economies posted negative growth, resulting in huge losses in the gross domestic product of our island economies. Despite these challenges, the pandemic has also provided the opportunity for the small and medium enterprises to embrace and increasingly use the ICT platforms to leverage marketing of products and services, as well as sourcing of products and services. The increase in use of electronic commerce is inevitable. But while offering many conveniences in business transactions, the IT platform is still fraught with many dangers that our entrepreneurs must be made aware of and assisted to navigate through. Internet fraud and cybercrime abound. There lies our other challenge. Developing and providing a credible, safe space and environment for our entrepreneurs. How do we address this? I leave this question to all of you. There has been increasing debate and dialogue taking place on trade and gender at the international front. Manifestations of this conversation is reflected in the increase in aid for trade projects that I alluded to earlier. And many of these aid for trade projects demand more enhanced and gender inclusiveness in trade activities. The MSG Secretariat is aware of these developments, and to this end, initiated this dialogue to deepen understanding and knowledge on the role and relationship between trade and gender, with a view to coming up with affirmative actions that can be taken to mainstream gender considerations in our trade development strategies and actions. While we acknowledge that gender is not limited to women alone, however, want to encourage all of us to recognize the significant role that women play in economic empowerment in Melanesia. We urge that more concerted attention is given to our womenfolk. With your understanding, let me make another observation here of the importance of the role of women. In our communities, the women are very important in food security. The women are very important in the notion of a savings culture. They're the ones who put food on the table for the family. They're the ones who know how much they can cook for today and how much to leave for tomorrow. They're the ones who know what to cook for consumption for today and what to leave as seeds to be sown for tomorrow. So the Melanesian culture, the Pacific culture, it is not alien to have women play an important role in community development, in ensuring that the family is well taken care of. Therefore, convening a stock-taking dialogue and analyzing the relevant issues pertaining to trade and gender within the context of the COVID-19 pandemic and electronic commerce is crucially important. I am pleased to note that this two-day event will bring together speakers from the national, the Pacific, and international levels who will provide more insights, more ideas, and more lessons to deepen our understanding and knowledge of how trade impacts gender, gender impacts trade, and highlight strategies to improve women empowerment and their greater involvement in trade in the MSG sub-region, as well as the broader Pacific region. With these remarks, I wish you well in your deliberations and look forward to the outcomes of the symposium. Thank you, Tomas. Thank you, Tru, Oleti, and Vinaka Vakalevu.
Thank you. Thank you, MSG Director General, Mr. Loma. I recognize that we have other of our friends, more friends in the region joining us from Kiribati at the same time here in Port Vila. I recognize the Commission for Labor, Manager for Aid for Trade, and my friend from Tana Coffee. So welcome, and others who are here and in the region. Now we will move to the they say to listen to the recorded remarks by the General Secretary of the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat based in Suva, Fiji, Mr. Henry Puna.
Mr. Leonard Luma, Director General, MSC Secretariat. Mr. Jimmy Rantes, Acting Director General at the Ministry of Commerce, Trade and Ni Vanuatu Business, Republic of Vanuatu. Ms. Annabelle Gonzalez, Deputy Director General of the World Trade Organization. Dr. Iria Escola, Deputy Head of Mission EU Delegation to the Pacific. High Commissioners, Your Excellencies, Ambassadors, of sewer-based missions, PACP senior trade officials, representatives of the private sector, ladies and gentlemen, Yorana Bulavinaka, and good morning, Olgeta. May I congratulate you on this inaugural Trade and Gender Symposium for the Melanesian sub-region. This is timely, necessary, and empowering work, and my sincere thanks goes out to the lead organizer and convener, the Melanesian Spearhead Group Secretariat. We have been pleased to assist and support this initiative, and my big thank you to Mas goes out to co-organizers, the International Trade Center, for your support to this important partnership. And by the way, in case you're wondering why I'm wearing a black top, this is Thursday, and the Secretariat has joined the global movement on Thursdays in Black in support of ending violence against women and girls. I also wish to extend my appreciation to all our partners, notably the European Union and the World Trade Organization, who have joined us today. Many thanks for your unwavering support and positive response for this first Trade and Gender Symposium for the Melanesian sub-region. The economic slowdown caused by the COVID-19 pandemic continues to impact businesses, and in particular, micro, small, and medium enterprises across the region and globally. The Pacific region is also facing the brunt of the pandemic in various ways, such as limited finance, slow trade facilitation reforms, standards, and limited connectivity, exacerbated by the tyranny of distance. It is important to note that a good percentage of SMEs, businesses, are female-owned or female-managed. This makes it imperative to have this dialogue. It will help set the standard and pace of fuller participation of female entrepreneurs in regional global trade. Over the next 2 days, the sub-region will be having honest and pragmatic discussions on the issues impeding the participation of more female entrepreneurs in the business space. I have taken note of the profiles of the speakers and moderators of each of the sessions, and I am pleased to see a good number of them are Pacific experts in their respective fields. This is a hugely positive sign that it's time to look within for the solutions and strategies we are yearning for. As the Blue Pacific, we understand our issues well, and we are best placed in articulating the solutions and presenting them to our able partners to assist in implementation. And that, ladies and gentlemen, demystifies the whole concept of aid for trade.
So we have here a pre-recorded address by Ms. Annabelle Gonzalez. She is currently the Deputy Director General of the World Trade Organization based in Geneva, and where we have Julio is from. He has just joined the MSG Secretariat, so please talk to him later. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Annabelle Gonzalez, Deputy Director General of the World Trade Organization. It's a real pleasure to address you today. I want to start by congratulating the Melanesian Group Secretariat, the Pacific Islands Forum, and the delegation of the European Union for the Pacific for organizing this important event. Our meeting today is taking place against the backdrop of several overlapping and compounding crises. Climate change is one of them. Its impacts are already being felt across regions, but it is the poorest and most vulnerable communities and countries, including your own, that are the hardest hit despite being least responsible for today's climate emergency. Then there is the lingering pandemic, which has exposed serious shortcomings in our ability to ensure equitable access to COVID-19 vaccines. More than 2 years after COVID first struck, just 13% of people in low-income countries are fully vaccinated, compared with 74% in high-income countries, according to the World Health Organization. Hot on the heels and its knock-on effects on energy and food prices, which were already on an upward trajectory even before the war broke out. The number of people whose access to food has been restricted to the point that their lives and livelihoods are at risk has increased to 345 million in 82 countries, according to the World Food Programme. One common and distressing thread running through this and other interlocking crises we face is that they are deepening and worsening inequality and undoing years of hard-won development gains. So putting a focus on the participation of female entrepreneurs in trade, as you do in this symposium, is very opportune. The question of how to make trade work better to fight inequality and foster inclusiveness is as important as ever. Joint research by the WTO and the World Bank shows that firms that trade employ more women, pay them better, and offer better working conditions. But the participation of women, and men for that matter, in global trade is not a given. It requires coordinated action within and across countries, and it must involve all stakeholders, from governments to the private sector, from academia to civil society, and from cities to international organizations. The agenda for today's symposium highlights the contribution that digitalization can make to expanding the participation of women in trade, and rightly so, because digitalization can be used very effectively by small businesses, including those owned by women, to break into global supply chains. Digitalization allows small businesses to overcome the cost of trading across borders and reach more customers in more countries. Indeed, a recent study found that where there is more digitalization, there is also more trade. A 10% increase in digital connectivity between countries raises goods trade by nearly 2%, parcels trade by 4%, and trading services by over 3%. Digitalization also allows access to more affordable, more sophisticated, and more diverse inputs, from software and communications technology to e-payments and online banking services. And that helps small businesses because they become more competitive in the global market. To turn these opportunities into tangible benefits, not least for women entrepreneurs, we need action across many areas, from building digital skills and addressing the gender and other digital divides, to expanding access to trade finance and improving the affordability and reliability of internet connections. Action on trade is critically important and must be part of any strategy to advance inclusive digital trade. The WTO has many tools that its members can use in support of such a strategy. Let me highlight a few areas where the WTO can make a real difference. First, trade facilitation. The benefits of trade will be hard to grasp if goods are held up at the border by burdensome and costly procedures. Implementing the WTO's trade facilitation agreement can be an effective way to lower the costs faced by businesses of all sizes, especially small ones, that are seeking to connect to global markets. When thinking trade facilitation, we must also think digitalization. Take paperless trade. Implementing cross-border paperless trade measures in the Asia-Pacific region would reduce the average time it takes to export by 24% and boost exports by $36 billion. These cost reductions can make a real difference for small businesses, which face huge challenges when trying to comply with burdensome customs procedures. Second, services trade. Services are transforming the global economy, a trend spurred by the rise of new technologies and accelerated by the pandemic. The emergence of a new global services economy driven by digital trade creates fresh trade and growth opportunities for women-owned businesses and for small and vulnerable economies in the Pacific and beyond to pursue a services-led development strategy. Late last year, a group of WTO members agreed on a new agreement to facilitate services trade and improve the business climate for service suppliers. And in a first for the WTO, the agreement contains a provision that prohibits discrimination between men and women. But so far, none of the 70 WTO members who will adopt commitments under the new agreement is a developing country member from your region. And this is a missed opportunity. Third, digital trade. A large group of WTO members is developing global rules in this area. These are the rules that will underpin the global economy of tomorrow. So it is important that your countries participate in these discussions to help shape the rules and ensure that they work for you. I recognize the challenges that your countries face to engage actively in this and other WTO work. The challenges you face are many and they are important. So let me take this opportunity to reaffirm that the WTO Secretariat, working with its partners, stands ready to support you through technical assistance and capacity building so that you can take full advantage of WTO work and initiatives on trade, digitalization, and gender. Before I conclude, let me briefly draw your attention to the important work that many WTO members are doing on trade and gender specifically. This work is relatively new, but it has already delivered concrete outcomes that can help inform your own work and initiatives in this area. One concrete outcome is the establishment of the Informal Working Group on Trade and Gender in 2020. The group brings together more than 120 WTO members, including several in the Pacific region, to share experiences and improve understanding of how trade policies can better support the participation of women in international trade. For its part, the WTO Secretariat is supporting these efforts through a broad range of initiatives. One of them is the WTO Gender Research Hub, a network of experts created to foster and disseminate relevant research on trade and gender. The WTO Secretariat also supports our members by offering training, collecting data, and providing tools to integrate gender in trade policies. One such tool was released at the end of July. It is a database that identifies and categorizes you are taking an important step towards building a proactive and forward-looking trade and gender agenda for your region. The WTO is eager to support your efforts and to help you utilize the many tools available at the WTO to make trade and digitalization a force against inequality and for inclusion. I look forward to working with all of you to make change happen. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was the Deputy Director General of the World Trade Organization, Ms. Annabel Gonzalez. Now we'll move on to here. I recognize that we have other delegates who have joined us virtually online and here in Port Vila. I recognize the CEO for Vanuatu Tourism and other entrepreneurs who are with us. Now we will move on to the remarks by the Charge d'Affaires of the European delegation to the Pacific, Dr. Ascola. Thank you.
Good morning. I hope you can all hear me. There is quite a bit of echo on my line. I hope that this will not affect you in Vanuatu. In any case, I would like to acknowledge the speakers have already intervened. Mr. Henry Puna, the Secretary General of Pacific Island Forum Secretariat, Mr. Jimmy Rands, Director of General Ministry for Trade, Vanuatu, Mr. Leonard Luma, General of MSC Secretariat. Excuse me, there is quite a bit of echo, which is disturbing. Is the line okay on your side?
We can hear you very clear.
You can hear me clearly. Well, that's the main thing. It's difficult for me to speak because I hear myself, you know, with a few seconds of delay. So this is why it's a bit difficult to speak. I will try. I will try. Don't worry. So I would say that the protocols have been already observed. So I would avoid going the connection is really not on my side. So distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I am very delighted to be here with you on this first day of the Symposium on Trade and Gender, even if it's only remotely that I can join you. Actually, I would like to start my intervention with a question for reflection, a question that I've been wondering about myself. Why do we need to empower and enable women specifically to participate in trade? After all, when we look at the trade agreements and trade policies, they to remove formal barriers without regard to the gender. They improve the opportunities of both men and women to access secure and decent employment and to benefit from international trade, both exports and imports alike. Why then stress the gender aspect specific in trade matters? Well, there are certainly several reasons, and I think many of the preceding speakers have already mentioned some of these reasons, and I would add a couple more to that list. Indeed, women are often underrepresented in jobs that are related to international trade. Women business owners also face many barriers preventing them from trading, including access to finance. Yet when we look at trade-related jobs in general, they are often very inspiring, they're rewarding, well paid. So I think jobs like this are important for well-being, overall well-being of families and of women in general. But this kind of job can also protect women from dependency and the related vulnerability to abuse. So I would say the role of trade and role of decent jobs for women is even more important than just a pure economic aspect. Trade can also help women to both inside and outside of their homes in equal terms with men. As already mentioned by preceding speakers, especially by Director General Luma, women are crucial for food security. And this aspect is all the more important in the current context of raising food prices and the looming food crisis as a result of the war in Ukraine. I've also seen here in the Pacific region how significant a role women play in many areas of food and fisheries products that are already exportable to foreign markets or can become so in the future. In the European Union, we have to consider gender aspects in all our policies, including trade. We have to ensure that our policies are gender just. And this goes much beyond of just including gender provisions in a trade agreement. It means that we also need to analyze gendered human rights impact of our trade agreements and ensure that those agreements do not exacerbate existing inequalities and or even create new inequalities. This is also what we promote at the World Trade Organization and its work on Aid for Trade, where the European Union has always played a very active role. In the Pacific region specifically, we promote women's participation in formulating trade policy and doing business through trade with our Pacific Regional Integration Support Program, the PRICE, that is program project today. It is the EU's largest ever trade-related assistance program in the Pacific. The EU has committed an overall amount of 37 million euros to strengthen regional integration in the Pacific region, and this is significant. In this context, it is also worth mentioning that 2 PRICE projects out of 3 are led by very beautiful women. Setaita Tupua from Fiji, Danushki Sanu from Sri Lanka, sorry about the pronunciation. And of course, here in Vanuatu, I'm sure you all know Jill Juma from Kenya, who has been very proactive in Vanuatu, elsewhere in the Melanesian subregion, after she was appointed only a few months ago as trade advisor for the United States under the Spirit project. Apart from these projects and programs, there are also other relevant actions that are ongoing in this area. For instance, the Pacific community just published, after this month actually, a call for proposals to strengthen the capacity of micro, small and medium enterprises in kava, coconuts, coffee, turmeric value chain. And this is for a significant capacity to export elsewhere to the region and to EU market as well. In the evaluation of our proposals, of the proposals for actions, we'll be looking also at their contributions to improve gender equality and to create opportunities for women. So it's always a criterion that we take into account in evaluations. The EU Ambassador Sujiro Singh just visited Vanuatu a couple of weeks ago. And in this context, he also met with Director Leonard Luma and discussed the importance of trade and women's economic empowerment. And I believe that the level of EU engagement with Vanuatu will be increasing even further. Our Commissioner for International Partnership, Jutta Urpilainen, will attend the conference of the Pacific Community in Manila later this year in November. This shows the importance that the European Union puts on Vanuatu and on the Pacific region in general. So there is and there will be active engagement at all levels between the European Union and our Pacific partners. including Vanuatu and the Melanesian sub-region. We hope to welcome Vanuatu soon to our dialogues also within the partnership agreement. Let me conclude by thanking very warmly the Pacific Island Forum Secretary, and of course Setaika, of those who have been involved in the organization of this workshop and our actions in general under the programs that I just mentioned. So keep up the good work, and I wish all fruitful discussions over the 2-day period of this symposium. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Escola. Now we will have remarks by Ambassador Mary Falemaka. She is currently the Pacific Islands Forum Permanent Representative to the WTO and other international agencies in Geneva, Switzerland. Madam Ambassador, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Director General. I wanted to acknowledge the distinguished speakers that have spoken before me, including the Director General of the MSG Secretariat, the Secretary General of the Pacific Islands Forum, my boss, the representative of the European Union, as well as the Deputy Director General of the WTO. I would like to extend a very good morning and warm greetings from Geneva to you this morning. First, let me thank the MSG Secretariat for the kind invitation to participate in this important symposium on trade and gender, and to provide some thoughts on this topic, which is of significance to the sustainable development of our Pacific Island countries, including the Melanesian sub-region. We know the immense role and impact that women have in our culture, in our island communities, and therefore we are not surprised to note that numerous reports indicate the key roles that women can play in realizing or achieving sustainable development for many developing countries. In the context of the Pacific region, and just to complement the statement that had been made by the Secretary General of the Pacific Island Forums, officials may wish to note that the forum leaders recognized the important role of women in development, in national development in our islands, and endorsed the Pacific Leaders Gender Equality Declaration at their 43rd meeting in August 2012. As such, leaders renewed their commitment to lift the status of women in the Pacific and to empower them to be active participants in political, economic, and social life. That declaration is considered one of our key regional high-level commitment by forum members to gender and sustainable development. More recently, at the 51st Pacific Island Forum Leaders meeting held in July 2022, leaders welcomed and endorsed the recommendation of the Pacific Island Forum Women Leaders meeting held on the 9th of June for the revitalization of the Pacific Leaders Gender Equality Declaration. This also recommends a comprehensive consultation process with national government, civil society, and regional and partner organizations to inform the renewed and updated declaration for leaders to endorse in 2023. The review and revitalization of the declaration, as well as the inclusion of gender equality issues, will be pursued under the thematic issue of people-centered development in the newly endorsed 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific continent. This is testament to the emphasis that members and leaders, more importantly, leaders of the Pacific Island Forum place on gender equality in recognizing the important role that women can play to reach our ultimate goal of more equal, more inclusive, and more sustainable Pacific region. Moving to the multilateral front, and also perhaps to complement some of the comments that have been made by DDG Elad in a statement. At the multilateral level, we are all aware of the SDG 5, which was endorsed by world leaders in 2015. That SDG commits all nations to achieve gender equality and to empower all women and girls by 2030. Women empowerment can be achieved in different ways, such as through education, promoting women in decision-making, or through employment. At the multilateral platform of the WTO, over 2/3 of the WTO members have been focusing on economic empowerment of women through trade and gender initiatives at the WTO for the last 5 years since 2015. So as the WTO DDG explained, this is a relatively new initiative. In 2017, at the WTO Ministerial Conference 11, MC11, held in Buenos Aires, a declaration on trade and women's economic empowerment was endorsed by 180 WTO members. To date, 127 members and observers have endorsed the Buenos Aires Declaration, and this includes Fiji, Samoa, Tonga, and Vanuatu. Since that declaration was endorsed in 2017, a lot of the work had been undertaken by the WTO in collaboration with other international organizations in Geneva, including exploratory discussions and thematic discussions and workshops held between 2018 and 2019 on different aspects of trade and gender, which range from women's access to financial resources, to promote women in development, trade policy role in promoting women in development, the regulatory reforms needed to support women in business. So this led to the launching of an insightful report in December 2020, which compiled the summary of the thematic discussions, including the shared best practices, noting the progress on additional issues related to trade and gender in the multilateral trading system. This helped further the dialogue on trade and gender nexus at the multilateral level and highlighted the need for gender-centered research and data collection to be done. In 2020, the WTO saw the establishment of the Informal Working Group on Trade and Gender, which marked the ultimate phase of the Buenos Aires Declaration that started in 2017. The Informal Working Group has dedicated their time at the first work plan in 2021 to furthering work around 4 main pillars. 1, reviewing the analytical work needed. 2, experience sharing. 3, considering the concept and scope of a gender lens to be applied to the work of the WTO, and contributing to the Aid for Trade work program. From their progress report in 2021, the importance of data and gender-based analysis was very much highlighted. Women traders and producers in the Pacific region were also consulted during the preparation of this report, and they suggested that there was a need to improve national capacity through enhanced policy coordination, transport and trade infrastructure. In that context, there were a number of factors that complicate data collection in the Pacific, including our unique geography, dispersed and remote communities, and the small size of our populations. An UNCTAD report published in 2020 regarding women in Kiribati and their participation in inter-island and international trade emphasized that one of the challenges was the collection of data on women's trading roles in the informal sector. Another important initiative that had been launched in the WTO, as mentioned by the DDG, relates to the Gender Research Hub. As she indicated, trade and gender is relatively new, and a lot of the discussions and debates around how do we shape multilateral rules that would support trade and gender. And data and statistics have been recognized to be the center of this work. So given the need for more gender-centered research in trade work, the hub was set up to deepen understanding of women's economic empowerment through trade by enhancing collaboration and exchange among trade and gender researchers. It also serves as a platform for the latest research on trade and gender nexus to be shared and discussed. The hub will host its inaugural World Trade Congress on Gender on the 5th to 7th of December in 2022 under the theme Gender Equality for Sustainable Trade and Recovery, where the latest research will be presented. The focus of the World Trade Congress on gender will be on sustainable development, particularly focusing on recovery and rebuilding from the COVID-19 pandemic. In addition, the WTO members have also used the trade policy reviews to highlight policy developments that contribute to gender equality and women economic empowerment. Since 2018, 55% of trade policy reviews have contained information provided by WTO members on their gender-responsive trade policies, totaling 25 out of 45 reviews carried out between January 2018 and September 2021. The latest trade policy reviews of 5 WTO Pacific members, Fiji, Papua New Guinea, Samoa, Solomon Islands, and Tonga, have made reference to the gender mainstreaming work undertaken by governments to integrate a gender perspective into national trade policy frameworks and overall development strategy. So that would be a useful piece of work to build on, particularly for the Melanesian countries, given that Fiji, Papua New Guinea, and Solomons are amongst the 3 that have recently undertaken trade policy reviews in the last 4 years. At MC12 in June this year, WTO ministers recognized women's economic empowerment and the contribution of MSMEs, micro, small and medium enterprises, to inclusive and sustainable economic growth, as well as acknowledged their different contexts, challenges, and capabilities in countries at different levels of development, and took note of the WTO, UNCTAD, and the International Trade Center's work on these issues. With this mandate established in the WTO in the multilateral process, we can anticipate more work in the WTO and other relevant organizations to support women's economic empowerment in the multilateral trading system. What does this all mean for the Melanesian sub-region and the Pacific region? While work on trade and gender is deepening in the WTO and multilateral institutions, to supporting gender and trade, the following lessons may be drawn on how trade and gender can support sustainable trade. First, the issue of trade policies. One of the issues under extensive discussion is how do we shape trade policies to better facilitate and promote women in trade? There was also recognition that while trade barriers have come down and that in terms of tariffs and non-tariff barriers, many barriers still remain for women, particularly the regulatory framework of countries that allow them to establish businesses, access to finance, skills, and so forth. So we need to ensure that we have that we review our trade policies to meet the needs of women who are trying to enter businesses. Second is the need for evidence-based policy. That is, a need to have the relevant data. As the DDG WTO indicated, the need for gender-based data is critical. The importance of ensuring that gender disaggregated data on women in business are identified and collected to shape the trade policies that we want to address. And to design these trade policies, we need this evidence so that we can establish the basis and identify gaps to design targeted intervention for women in business. The WTO, under the Gender Trade Hub, has established a database to help countries in analyzing gender-based data. And also the WTO can also, as DDG had indicated, provide training for officials to upskill themselves on designing a gender-based data collection. A third issue relates to regional trade agreements. How can we use our regional trade agreements, including sub-regional trade agreements like the MSG trade agreement, to encourage women in business? Again, the WTO Gender Trade Hub provides a database of gender provisions in trade agreements, and this could be useful in considering how we shape regional trade agreements to support women in business in the Melanesian sub-region, and indeed in the wider Pacific for the other regional trade agreements that we have. A fourth issue is looking at emerging opportunities to promote women in business. One of the issues that have been cited by the speakers before me is the area of e-commerce, which provides a significant opportunity to integrate women in business as well as into the regional and international trade. The ITC, International Trade Center analysis of COVID-19 impact found that the micro, small, and medium enterprises that had an online presence during COVID-19 adapted well to the lockdown in trade that were imposed during COVID-19, and therefore were more resilient to trade during that time. So these have important lessons for us in building more resilient women in business to ensure that we upskill them, that they have access to the infrastructure needed to engage. And in addition to that, e-commerce is an important tool for inclusive growth to integrate women into trade, regional trade and international trade, as well as to promote rural-urban linkages. Many women work in the primary sector, in the rural areas, for instance, in farms, in fishing, and therefore e-commerce can provide a useful tool to integrate them into e-commerce. In addition, many women also work in the informal sector. So opportunities and tools such as e-commerce can integrate them into the formal sector. And finally, I would like to underscore the importance of aid for trade in shaping or in promoting resilient and sustainable gender and trade initiatives. Since 2007, aid for trade donors and partner countries have gradually integrated the issue of gender into their aid for trade strategies. In 2019, the monitoring and evaluation exercise of the WTO revealed that 84% of donors' aid for trade strategies and 85% of partner countries' national and regional development strategies seek to promote women's economic empowerment. These are important statistics, but it is important that the Pacific and indeed the Melanesian region focuses in ensuring that we shape the aid for trade discussions to support the kind of reforms we need to promote trade and gender, whether it's reforms to our trade policies, whether the support needed to collect the gender disaggregated data needed for policy analysis, or integrating women into e-commerce or upskilling them, training them. It would be important that we ensure that the aid for trade initiatives that we engage in with our donors and our partners are also able to support trade and gender initiatives. So with that said, I wanted to close by just saying that trade has much to offer in achieving gender equality within the region, and most importantly, in improving the standard of living of many people, given the ripple effect in development when women are empowered. This gives much importance to the need for well-informed, evidence-based, and gender-focused trade policy instrument measures at all levels, national, regional, and multilateral, that would empower women economically so as to promote inclusive and sustainable growth for all. I'd like to thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Falemaka. Now, this concludes the time for remarks from our distinguished delegates. Please let us show our appreciation again to them. Now, this is where we come to the photo, and okay, listen. Yeah, I have to stand with my advisor this way so that we really look into the screen. This Jill has just given me the advice. This is the time where for photo and tea break. Yeah. So photo, all of us are going to come this side, and we ask those that who are with us virtually to turn on your cameras. Yeah, turn on your cameras. You see the subject. I am practicing the subject right away. I have my advisor who is on my right side. Yeah? So all of us will come this side. We will stand here. Our friends inside the region virtually will put on their cameras. Then we get the photo. And after the photo, then we have tea break. And after that, then we move to the session. And how long the tea breaks? 10 minutes? Oh, it's a working tea. Okay. And to our friends who are with us in the region, apologies that you cannot be with us, but we promise you the next time we have a session here, when you come to Port Vila, we will ensure that tea will be with Lap Lap, with Tuluk, with Simboro, and and with Nalot, that we'll have everything here. So please, please, our delegates, if we could decide, you may come for it here. If you may face the same for taking photo below you may. I have now switched to my Bislama side of things. So by you come up this side, we'll get the photo here. See our friends are already with us. We'll stand this side, Jill, and face this way. Oh, so everyone will stand. Okay, so please, everyone come up this side. Yeah. So we look that way, and okay. So please, everyone come up this side.
Our onliners, please, can you turn on your camera? We need one of yourselves.
Oh, right away. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. For the breakout sessions, we have two. One is here. Okay. One would be here, and the other would be that side. There will be directions given for the two. Oh, Sova will clarify more.
Thank you, onliners.